and welcome to another Coffee with Kilroy, or what I many times call beverage in a book. My beverage is coffee. Yes, let's get this off the board before anybody starts yelling at me. Some good coffee. I'm filming this in the morning, posting it in the morning, and hope you're enjoying it. The book today is Tales of War. Yes, I'm back to Tales of War, which is one of my regular segments. And I have a link to it in the, I have it in the playlist down below, Tales of War. So take a look at that if you're interested in other days in history. But that is exactly what Tales of War is. It's a book about great stories from military history for every day of the year. And I've covered it quite a bit. And today is August the 5th. So what are we going to talk about today? Can you figure out what we're going to talk about today? I don't know. There's just a little hint there. 5th of August, Farragut dams the torpedoes at Mobile Bay. 1864. Today, American Admiral David Farragut earned his place in naval history as well as in all future books of quotations. Farragut commanded the Union fleet of 18 ships during the American Civil War. As the mist evaporated on this hot August morning, the admiral led his fleet past Fort Morgan, a Confederate stronghold that guarded Mobile Bay on the Alabama coast of the Gulf of Mexico. Immediately, the enemy opened fire, and the intrepid Farragut had a sailor lash him to the mast so he could use both hands to hold his telescope and see above the swirling smoke. Okay, this man is committed. In addition to firing their cannon, the Confederates had laced the channel with mines, then called torpedoes, and the leading Yankee warship, the ironclad Tecumseh, blew up and sank with 93 of her crew of 114. Near panic, the Brooklyn hove to, and Farragut's whole line hesitated, uncertain whether to attack or retreat, as the guns of Fort Morgan continued their deadly cannonade. Refusing to be intimidated, Farragut cried, "Damn the torpedoes!" full speed ahead, and led his warships safely through the minefield. Page turn. To destroy the Southern fleet waiting within the bay and forcing the surrender of Fort Morgan. This famous victory effectively closed the last Confederate port and still successfully defying the Union naval blockade, and made a major contribution to the North's march to victory. So there we go. Damn the torpedoes. And we are going to do the same today with Iron and Oak, ship-to-ship combat during the American Civil War. This is a game designed by James N. Day, published by GMT Games, and it is one of the few games out there that covers naval warfare during the American Civil War. I've covered Rebel Raiders on the Sea, which is a strategic level war game, mainly talking about the blockade, but there are some riverine type combat as well. But that's more strategic. And then if you wanted to play the ship-to-ship engagements, you have this game. You can kind of transfer it to this board and then play the ship-to-ship. So they kind of go together. They're designed by different people and done differently, but they do kind of fit together. And I've done a piece on that. And I might try to put a link to that if I can find it. But there are some other, there was a, I believe there's like a old Quinto game, that, came out, and it might have been republished a couple of times on ironclads. Avalon Hill, I think, might have had an old ironclads game. So there are games out there, but this is the advent of the armored warship, or armored ships, and really getting, starting to play a more significant role in combat. So that's why this is kind of an interesting era of war games or naval combat. So Iron and Oak is just that, is ship-to-ship combat. There's several scenarios. In fact, there is a scenario for Battle of Mobile Bay. There's actually the first part of the scenario is kind of running the gauntlet. You basically have the Confederate forces are these three forts: Fort Morgan, and the water battery, the fortress battery, then Fort Gaines, the fortress battery. And then you have the ships, the 18 ships that were under Farragut in here. And then, so you got special rules, and then you have the Battle of Mobile Bay, the final clash, and then you have the ships that survived the first part are ported over to this part of the scenario, and then you have the Confederate forces over here with their ships. And so probably the Confederates are going to be outnumbered here because there's probably going to be a certain amount that is going to survive, and there's only a few facing them on this. And so this is the scenario book, which is your typical scenario book, gives you the setup, and then you got your special rules and victory conditions and the like. So it does have 2 scenarios on the Battle of Mobile Bay, and then you have the components to this. And this interesting thing about this system is these cards. These are basically your ship cards that give you all the information that you need to play the game, or the specific stats for the ships. Feels a little bit kind of like a miniatures game on this. In fact, I think you could play this with miniatures. I mean, you have the counters here, which are fine and standard GMT quality type counters. I don't have all the American forces or the Union forces on here, but I have the Confederate ships that were in the battle mix on here. But you can supplement them for miniatures, and there's a movement system which is interesting. It's not, as you can see here, it's not a hex and counter movement system. You have these grids, and so there's a lot of play on the drift. And if you hit land, you kind of run afoul, and you got to get free of that. And so there's a lot of gameplay on movement, but it's a little abstracted in that you're moving through these blocks, these boxes and grids. And so there's a lot of room in here to do the combat. And the combat is not, you're not like lining up as much as you're trying to maneuver inside the grid. But the combat is done with comparing dice rolls. And so this is interesting because it's one of the first games, war games that I had, or one of the earlier ones that uses polyhedral dice. You can see you got 6-siders and 8-siders and 10-side and stuff like that. Here you got different kind of dice in here. These have seen better days. I haven't used them that much. That's just what they did. That's what they just faded. And you have these order cards, which will allow you to do your orders. As you're ordering the ships. You got drift, refloat, anchor, weigh anchor, that's just kind of stopping in the water. Opposing maneuver, unfoul, that's kind of breaking free. You got maneuver, you got ramming, you got all kinds of different orders in here, using those with those cards. But as I said, the heart of the system is this comparing dice rolls of the ships. So as you can see here, you have the Tecumseh, which was the first one to go down in the scenario, hit a torpedo or mine. But you can see here, it's got armored, where it's gray, that means it's got armor. If it's a board, then it means it's got wood. So the armor is going to have better defense, right? So you're going to roll these dice. You're going to roll a 10, a 6, and a 4. I think this is a 4-sided. Maybe this only goes 1 to 4. That's why even though it's got more than 4 sides, it only goes 1 to 4. Mine only goes to 4. Anyway, so you're going to roll that versus whatever the fort, like this is Fort Gaines, it's going to roll its combat dice, and you're going to compare the numbers. The higher number does more damage. There's a whole comparison here of where did that go? Right here. So if the combat roll is less than the defense roll, then there's no effect. If the combat roll is greater than 2 times, you do this. If it's greater than 3 times, you do this. If it's 3 times, you do this. If it's greater than that, then you get real damage here. So it's versus wooden location versus armored location. So there's going to be a process to determine the location. You've got your turret rear, turret side, turret front, waterline, and deck. All this is armored on the Tecumseh. The number of hits it can take total hits is 12. And as it takes hits, like if it rolls different dice. So if it only has 0 to 3 hits, it rolls a 10 and an 8 for movement or for maneuver. If it's got 4 to 7 hits, it rolls this, and if it's got 8 to 11 hits, it rolls this. So it changes how you can do on maneuvering. And then you also have keeping track of crew hits and what it can do on crew hits. But its gunnery value is these 3 dice. So it's going to roll a 10, an 8, and a 6. That's pretty significant. If you look at some of these other ships, the Union ships can have some pretty strong gunboats here, whereas, they get some of these wooden ships, 8 and a 6, a little bit less. Here's a 10 and a 4. Here's an 8, right? And so some of the Confederate ships are, they have a mix between armor and wood, and that's a 10 and a 4, 10 and an 8, 8 and a 4, so not as much, right? The ramming is just for that, is for ramming. And then also you have some modifiers here, whether you're shooting through the stern or the bow, there might be a modifier on that. So a lot of the information is in these cards as you play the game. So it is very much a very interesting game. You also have markers here to keep track of your hits and hits or shields in there, and then the stuff happens like stuff damage to your stack or damage to the engine, or keeping track of different damage as it hits your ship. You keep track of that with counters. So there you have it, kind of a quick overview of Iron and Oak. Interesting game. The movement is a little, the combat's pretty straightforward. I mean, figuring out the location, you have charts to figure all that stuff out, the gunnery charts and hit location charts. And so figuring out what gunnery to what area that you're shooting at is not that hard. And then it's rolling dice, right? It's rolling dice and adding them up and see which, trying to get a higher roll. I think they call it competitive dice or competitive combat or something like that, which is kind of weird. But so you're rolling dice and try to get a higher number. And there might be some other modifiers involved with it, but a lot of information is right here on the cards. It's the movement that takes a little, doing the orders and doing a little bit of movement and figuring out how that works is a little bit more, but it's not that complex. It's not like, some of the Age of Sail games, like War Galley, which is about triremes, or the Age of well, that's not Age of Sail, but that's triremes. But Age of Sail types games from GMT that have a little bit more complexity on catching the wind and running with the wind and stuff like that. It's not that complex, but there is some stuff. This is more riverine type combat, so there is some complexity to the maneuver. But overall, this kind of is somewhat of a dice fest, right? Because you're rolling dice and comparing them and having fun that way. So there you have it on this 5th of August, the Battle of Mobile Bay, and a very important naval battle because it took out the last, fighting fort or blockade fort. And so there is Iron and Oak. Love to know your thoughts on this game, what you think about it, or the fact of trying to run it with Rebel Raiders and how that feels. But anyway, feel free to drop your comments below, and thank you for stopping by for this Tales of War. Thanks for watching.